Let's find some books to put on your TBR, and perhaps most important, let's cross some books off your TBR, because what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to give some book reviews of some recent books that I've read, some classics, some historical fiction, and some new releases. And I'm going to explain to you what I did and did not like about these books. And with book reviews, I always try to give you an idea of what type of book it is, because just because I liked it or didn't like it, that doesn't mean you're going to have the same opinion. So hopefully by the end of this, you're going to be able to see if these books are books for you or not books for you. So let's start with my favorite book that I've read recently. And if you have not read Jane Austen in a while, take this as your sign to read it. So Pride and Prejudice, this was a reread for me, but it has been literally decades since I've read it. And I read it in high school. So it was almost like I was reading it for the first time, because of course I know what this story's about, but I mean, it's been so long. And can I just tell you that rereading it was a delightful experience. I'm the kind of person that, I tend to like to have one or two books going at the same time, but when I was reading this is all that I read, and I read it rather quickly, which is saying something, because I do think that the language, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it is a little bit archaic, meaning the way that people spoke at this time, it was a little bit more circuitous, I would say. Like maybe today somebody would write "the cat is ugly," whereas when Jane Austen was writing, she would probably write something like, "Well, I dare say this cat's face isn't a bit pleasing to me," or something like that. Something weird, right? But something that's interesting about reading this maybe slightly different version of English is that I have started to tackle again this book. This is just a research book for me. It is a World War I memoir, and I have DNF'd this book so many times because I've always found that the language was just like, I couldn't picture what he was trying to say. But after reading Pride and Prejudice, and now I have moved on to The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which has a similar style of English, I'm finding, much to my, I would say, shock, that the way that he's writing, I am picturing it so clearly in my head. So I think it's almost like learning a slightly different version of English. And because of my delightful experience with Pride and Prejudice, I will be reading and rereading several of Jane Austen's books this year, as well as some other classics. And since I am talking about classics right now, let's go on to Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. Now, this is an interesting book because I had known going into it that the book kind of goes off on a weird tangent at the end. Maybe like 60% of the way through, it sort of goes off on this weird tangent about organized religion and sexual liberation. On its surface, so at the beginning of the book, it is about a man who grew up on Mars. So he was born on Mars and he was raised by a Martian race, and then he is taken back down to Earth. And so it's the story of, what happens to him? What is this sort of cultural experience that he's experiencing here on Earth? And since this year, I am sort of on a mission to read and reread lots of classics. I wanted to get to some science fiction authors like Robert Heinlein, last month, if you follow my channel, I did read Parable of the Sower. So these are some very seminal science fiction writers. Robert Heinlein is considered one of the fathers of the type of science fiction, realistic science fiction, which is the type of science fiction that I enjoy myself the most. So I will say that I did DNF Stranger in a Strange Land when it started just kind of going off on a really bizarre tangent. I will say that I'm glad that I read what I read. I mean, it's not that I disliked the book, it's just that I felt like I got what I needed from it, and then I sort of moved on. Next, I read Einstein, His Life and Universe by Walter Isaacson. So this one I very much enjoyed. I liked this one a lot. I've read a few of Walter Isaacson's books, and I find him to be, an entertaining writer. And so if there's someone who you're interested in that he's written about, I would recommend picking it up. I will say that the thing I found most interesting about Einstein is just how much of a skeptic he was in terms of agreeing with scientific consensus, and how much he believed that, all scientific breakthroughs, they come from questioning authority, questioning what you're told. It was really interesting. And when he got older, he found that he was becoming part of, the conservative scientists, and he was stuck in these grooves of not being able to get out of how everyone else thinks. Super interesting in that respect. I will say that this book, I don't think that it explained the science of relativity all that well. Maybe it's just because I'm someone that I really like to understand fully the science of things. And so that's why actually after reading that book, I decided to buy this book, Why Does E Equal MC Squared and Why Does It Matter? Just because for me, I want to understand it, I want to grasp it. So that was my only critique of that book. Next up, let's go with a book that I loved. I loved this book, and that was The Unseen World by Liz Moore. So the reason I chose this book is because The Gods of the Wood by Liz Moore, it's kind of like this super popular book that everyone's talking about and everyone really likes, but it's about missing kids, which I just hate hate reading about that kind of stuff, so I thought, well, you know, Liz Moore, she's got a huge backlist, so why don't I just read something else of hers? So The Unseen World, kind of how I would describe this book, it has a very similar tone to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, so if you like this book, you'll probably really like The Unseen World. But The Unseen World has more of a mystery in it. So it's kind of like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow with a mystery, or kind of a way that you could describe it is, what would it be like if you were an 11-year-old girl and you were being raised by a single parent, and this single father was John Nash, the mathematician John Nash, who had some issues. I don't want to say anything else about the book because I do think that she does a great job of just like uncovering the mystery slowly by slowly. I will say that I listened to this book and I could not stop listening. I actually listened to it in 3 days, which was very weird because these were 3 normal days, like 3 working days, 3 days where I have my kids, 3 days where, you know, my evening is filled with practices and dinner and talking to people. So how I managed to squeeze in that book in 3 days, I don't know. Other than that, I found the time to listen to it because it just really sucked me in. And now let's end with some books that I didn't particularly like. Now that doesn't mean you're not going to like them, but let me just explain to you why I didn't like them. So first up is The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate. So Lisa Wingate is the author of Before We Were Yours, which is a book that I really liked. So I was really excited for this book and I was looking forward to it, but I actually DNF'd it. So it's a historical fiction book. It is a dual timeline book, and it is about a story related to the Civil War. And the reason why I couldn't get into it is because I felt like it fell into a trap of so many historical fiction books, which I feel like they automatically pick this dual timeline thing, and it doesn't always work. I just feel like, I don't know if it's just what the author's publisher tells them that they have to do, but they write these dual timelines. But with the dual timeline, it strips the past story of its mystery. So you kind of like know where it's going, and it never quite has the mystery that you need in a historical fiction novel, or at least that I enjoy in a historical fiction novel. I guess I've just read so many historical fiction novels that just go back and forth between the dual timelines, and I'm just really getting like sick of this trope. Why can't we just have stories that go from beginning to end? I'm really starting to just get so irritated with so many historical fiction books. Another historical fiction book that wasn't for me was The People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks. I was really looking forward to this one, so when it came up on Libby, I was really excited for it. But again, I felt like it was the dual timeline thing. So the reason why it's called The People of the Book is because it is the story of a very famous illuminated manuscript, the Sarajevo Haggadah. And what I didn't like about this dual timeline is it was telling the history of the book, of the Haggadah, but every time you would go back to that history, it would be like a new vignette about the people that handled the book. And so none of the vignettes really related to the other vignettes, other than the fact that they were all dealing with the same book, but it was more like short stories. You'd go from the modern timeline to a short story, modern timeline to a short story. And I just found that I couldn't care about the people in the past because I would never hear about them again. I mean, I don't know, maybe I would. I actually DNF'd this book because I just could not maintain my interest. And then I will say in the modern timeline, I just found the main character to be very unlikable, as well as the career that she was in. So she was an academic, and I just felt that it wasn't like believable that she was in the position that she was in, because I don't know, academia can be pretty stodgy and pretty conservative, and it takes a long time to rise into academia, and the fact that she was so young and so accomplished, it just didn't like fit to me. So I guess it just like wasn't believable. So that's why I DNF'd that book. And then lastly, my last book that I'm going to review today is Lost Man's Lane by Scott Carson. This is a new release, or at least a release for 2024. The fact that I'm getting to it in 2025 is pretty normal for me. But this was a pretty hyped book. It was kind of touted as, you know, if you're a fan of modern Stephen King, so as Stephen King writes today, where it's more like creepy and not the horror gore of his older stuff. I've actually only read one of Stephen King's books, 11/22/63, which wasn't, you know, it had some gore in it, but it wasn't what I imagined, you know, like It or something would be like. But anyways, Lost Man's Lane is touted as being in the same vein as modern Stephen King. It's a coming of age story about a high school boy living in 1999, and there's some weird things going on in Bloomington, Indiana. That's where he lives. Some weird kind of like like creepy horror things going on with snakes. Now, I didn't DNF this book. I didn't dislike it enough to DNF it, but ultimately I felt like for me, it wasn't successful. It almost felt like it was a rough draft. And I don't know if this is something that is just what is happening with modern books. Is that, I mean, I don't know anything that's going on in the publishing industry, and please let me know in the comments below if you do, but I've read so many modern books where I feel like it didn't have an editor, or it could have used another 1 or 2 good edits. Do publishing companies not have money for editors anymore? I don't know. But Lost Man's Lane kind of felt like the first draft of this book. And I'll just give you an example why. So the resolution of the story, it kind of just like came out all at once in like an info dump, a letter basically. And I felt like this is something that if you're writing a book, you would do in a first draft, because you're just like getting it out for yourself. You just got to get it out. You figure it out. You figure the resolution, and you just like type it out in 2 pages. And then you have to go back and kind of make it work with the plot. Well, I felt like the author never went back. At least that's what I thought about it. And I don't like to like impugn the work of anyone. And I know that everyone can use a good editor. So I'm just wondering if this is more just a result of the publishing industry as it is today. Again, I don't know. I'm just guessing. But there you go. There are some book reviews of some books. I hope you have found something for your TBR. Maybe you've decided to cross something off your TBR. And as always, happy reading.